All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Arif Rafiq. I'm the Transportation Industry Manager here with Esri Canada. And today we're going to be doing a webinar. It's called Miss the Bus, Not Today's Transit Planner. And my co-host here is Christina Xing, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. This is Christina. So today, Arif and I are doing this webinar together, and we'll introduce some technologies and demographic information that you can explore with your transit planning, and hopefully that will offer you some insights about where you want to head within your own organization.
All right. Thanks, Christina. So today we're going to focus, like I said, transit. We're going to focus on a certain aspect of transit. That's going to be the fixed route transit systems. And here's, if you've ever seen one of our webinars before, or at least one of mine and Christina's, we don't like using slides. So everything you're going to see today is going to be real data and real demos of software, okay? So let's get started here. The first thing I want to do is I want to show you what is going to be required to do everything that we're going to show you today. And basically there's three things. One of the things that you'll need, of course, is going to be an Esri ArcGIS license. The other thing that you'll need is an extension to ArcGIS called Network Analyst. So if you go online, you can very easily find information about Network Analyst. But what we're going to show is going to make use of this extension. Most of transit agencies within Canada who are using Esri software already have this. So I'm hoping that when you watch this, you'll be able to see other things that you might be able to do with the technology. All right, and later on, what you're going to see as well is a little bit of use of insights for transit data. The insights product isn't required to do anything that we're, or actually to do any analysis with transit, but it really opens up the boundaries. And so I'm hoping that you'll see a lot of that interesting stuff with insights. But just bear in mind, it's not necessarily required. You will see it nonetheless. The other thing that we're using is data. And I'm going to be picking on the region of Waterloo here. I hope if anybody on Grand River Transit is on this call, hope they don't mind. There was no forward notice that we decided to use it. But one of the reasons I wanted to use it is because I found that the open data site of the region of Waterloo is quite complete. There's a lot of information here, so a little bit of plug for the region here. But all the data that you're going to see is extracted from here, so it's publicly accessible, which means, in other words, you can get started right away. And the final thing that we've used is, let me just open up another website here. So if you go to transport.esri.ca, and then you scroll over to Transit Gallery, you're going to find something called Public Transit in ArcGIS. Now, following the webinar, we'll send out links, so you don't have to remember this, or it's not going to be a test at the end. But there's a very nice story map to follow through if you haven't seen it yet. But I want to bring your attention to this tab called Transit Tools. These are freely downloadable tools that interpret the GTFS in order to do what we're going to show. All right, so we'll make sure that you guys have this link so you can download all these tools. And remember, they require the Network Analyst component I showed you earlier for that to work. All right, so let's get started. And I'm trying to, there we go. All right, so one of the first things that I did is after I grabbed the GTFS data from the Waterloo Open Data site, using one of those tools, and the tool in particular, let me see, it's terrible box up top. One of the tools that I use right here is called Display GTFS and ArcGIS. So using this tool, we were able to download that GTFS data and generate this, all automatically. I didn't draw anything. This was just brought in from the GTFS data. For those of you who don't know what GTFS is, I would imagine most people on this call probably do, but it is basically a text file that looks like this, or a collection of text files. And what it does is it describes the schedule the routes, locations, the stops, trips, fares, a whole bunch of information. And you're looking at it. This is basically it. So those tools take these text files and interpret it so we can start to visualize that. And this was totally automatic. What we're doing is we're looking at this in ArcGIS Online, and I have great access into all of the different attributes that are on these routes. So if I click on them, you can see all sorts of interesting information. Right now, I think all we've done is we've color-coded them by the, oh, I thought they were route number, but they're not. Okay, it's no big deal. We still have the route ID here, and we can connect that back to the route data. All right, so we brought the route data in. The other thing that is also encapsulated within the GTFS is the stop location. This was also interpreted using the tools, and you can see where they are. And by clicking on them, of course, we get some information that came from those GTFS files. All right, so now that we have this, one of the questions that we can ask ourselves as a planner is, using this information, how effective or how much coverage are we giving our citizens with our transit network? And one of the most, well, the traditional way to do this was to take that route diagram here, the route lines, and draw what's known as a static buffer outside of that line. So in this case, I've drawn that in. I've taken basically 400 meters. So away from that line, I've drawn 400 meters. And we can see the highlighted area, which is supposed to show the coverage that we have with our system. But most of the transit planner on this call, as I would imagine, are aware that this is not a very accurate way. All right. I mean, looking at this, we can see that we have coverage in a lake. That's what that dark zone here. Here, looks like we're jumping over that river to get to that route. And, you know, here we're jumping over highways. This is not practical. All right. Here's the other thing. If I take a look at that stop, you'll notice that we have stops here. We have stops over here. But we have this one route that actually takes a highway. And it suggests that we have coverage here according to transit access, which of course we know is not true. That bus is not going to pull over on the on the side of the highway and pick up a passenger. Not going to happen. So what we do with this data is we utilize one of the other tools. I'm going to try to, there we are. This tool right here called Better Bus Buffers. If we use this on that GTFS data, we can generate something that looks like this. Now, if I hide that route buffer, this is a much more accurate representation of the access that our transit system gives to the city. This was basically drawn using a real 400-meter walk distance to the stops. So notice we have no blue area around that highway. Makes sense. And as we zoom in here, we'll start to see that these are irregularly shaped polygons. And it also accurately represents that, you know, we're not going to jump that river to try to get to that stop. So that's why there's no blue area over here. It makes sense, right? People don't want to wade through rivers to get to the transit stop. However, we do have people, I've seen people, you know, run by through a red light to reach a bus. But that's a whole other discussion we're not going to get into right now. All right. So this, as you can see, if we compare it directly, it's a much more smaller representation, but much more accurate. So those transit planners who are already using this to give a good idea about what kind of coverage we have, good for you. But there's some other detail that also gets generated from this tool. If I turn off the routes and the stops, we'll see something a little bit more. So now I've color-coded this data with the amount of trips per hour available within a 400-meter walk distance to each stop. Now, this tells us a little bit more information. And it kind of looks like what we would expect, right? Within the downtown core of Kitchener, Waterloo, and if we move over here to Cambridge, you see we have darker areas. And that suggests we have more trips available per hour to go somewhere. And out in the suburbs here, we have a lighter shade, which suggests we don't have a lot of options. All right, and that makes sense. That's intuitive for a bus system. But what this doesn't tell us is where it's going. So, for example, if I'm standing in downtown Kitchener, I can see that I have a lot of options of transit, but that 35 or over 35 number doesn't tell us where those buses are going. All it tells me is that I have a lot of options for transit. So that is a good metric, but there's more to the story. And in order to look at the other side of that story, we're going to have to look at the destinations, not just where we're leaving from. All right, so here we have a list of supermarkets. And I'm going to let Christina drive from here.
That's right. Thanks, Arif. Yes, so we are going to look at a scenario where where anyone wants to get to a supermarket in this region. And I believe this data was from the open data catalog from the region of Waterloo as well. So really good extensive data, a list of data that are accessible to the public and allows us to do some further analytics. So here we're looking at a whole bunch of supermarkets in the region of Waterloo. I don't know how complete this data set is. It may not include every single grocery store out there, but it's a good indicator that we can use. So for a supermarket, if I am going to get groceries, let's say walk there, I don't want to walk more than 15 minutes to get to a supermarket because I have to carry a lot of groceries back and it might be heavy, so I don't want to walk that far and that long. So within 15 minutes from each supermarket, I've created a buffer of a walk time of 15 minutes. So this tells me how far I can walk or where can I walk to within 15 minutes to that supermarket. And we can kind of see, this one is kind of interesting. I don't know, this is on the highway, seems like there's only one line that goes around the supermarket. I guess it's pretty far to get there if I'm just walking, but we see some coverage and some areas don't have a lot of coverage just by walking distance. So the next thing I'm wondering, okay, maybe I should take the use of public transportation. So how can I do that? So within 15 minutes, where can I get to, or how far can I go away from the supermarket by taking public transportation in 15 minutes? So I've created another buffer using the transit information. So you can see the lighter areas are the areas where I can get to a supermarket using the combination of walking and public transportation. So you can see it gives me actually quite a lot more coverage, especially in this area, and also some area here. So I'm pretty sure there are really good transit coverage in these areas. So that's very interesting. But now when I think about, okay, so since I am taking public transit, I don't mind sitting on the bus and just, holding my groceries on the bus. So I'll do a further buffer that will include a 30-minute transportation. And that gives me another story to look at when I have a 30-minute buffer from the superstore. So you can see I have a lot more access to the supermarkets when I can travel 30 minutes on the bus and also walking. And if we look, okay, this bothers me a little bit, this area. I don't know. Eric, what do you think of that area?
I think that's a terrible place to put a supermarket. I mean, looking at the map, you can clearly see that it's like, zoom in a little bit, and we'll see that on the north side of that supermarket, if you wanted to walk there, you got to walk through, what, a marsh, it looks like?
Yeah,
Can you imagine walking through a marsh to pick up groceries? That's terrible.
That would be a little challenging.
It's located right off the highway, so it's obvious that this is a very drive-to supermarket, and it was designed for that kind of audience. But, it's fair enough. I mean, look at some of the other ones where you have great coverage with public transportation, driving, and by walking. I think that's a good hallmark or a good indicator of whether you have a good location for a supermarket. Right?
For sure. Also, I just noticed something else. In St. Jacobs, there is no supermarket in this area. I'm sure there are some grocery stores, but if really, the reality is they don't have a supermarket. I think that's my next job. Just open like a new supermarket in St. Jacobs.
I
All
took my
right.
kids there actually a little while ago, a couple of years ago. Beautiful little town, but I don't think I noticed any supermarkets.
Really?
So you might be onto something there.
Okay, okay, I'm going to write a business proposal. All right, fantastic. So we've looked at this supermarket scenario, and now I'm going to pass things back to Earth, who will take us to another scenario and explain another traffic options using whatever he's looking at.
Whatever. Okay. So yeah, Christina kind of knows what I'm going to be covering, obviously. But you know, supermarkets is important. Of course, everyone's got to eat, and so having the accessibility to the supermarket is, like I said before, taking a look at transit accessibility and turning it on its head, not necessarily from where you want to leave from, but where you want to arrive to. And so that's what this supermarket demonstration was all about, is, you know, how much access do the citizens of the region of Waterloo have to supermarkets. Now, like I said, supermarkets are important. But, you know, this being our webinar and my interests being what they are, I'm a little bit more interested in something much more critical than supermarkets, at least in my opinion. It's far more critical, much more important than just regular food, and that's ice cream. I have a terrible addiction to ice cream. And so one of the things that I did is, guess what? I was lucky enough to find the location of ice cream shops on the region of Waterloo's open data site. Isn't that awesome? Like, great job, whoever put that together. I can find ice cream locations. Now, of course, this begs the question, is this all the ice cream locations in the city of Waterloo and Kitchener? I certainly hope not, because I think the city is sorely underserved when it comes to ice cream accessibility. But nonetheless, let's dig into this a little bit more closely, okay? So we have all of our ice cream. And the thing with ice cream, it's a little bit different from groceries, right? If I get a craving, I want to get there within 10 minutes. So I've put together a little map that allows me to see where in the city I have 10-minute ice cream accessibility. And that's what you're looking at here. Notice this looks a little bit different from the previous map. And if I flip back, you'll see that this previous map kind of shows coverage areas with polygons and shapes. And right now what I'm looking at is actual lines going on the roads. So this is just another way of looking at the data, or the results, mind you. And in some ways, it could be a little bit more accurate, because remember, in order to get to each one of these ice cream parlors, I actually have to walk along a traversable route. And in this case, my traversable routes are the streets, and so that's what I've defined this as. Now, actually, if I zoom in a little closer, look at this one. I noticed this a while ago. If I zoom in a little closer, there's an ice cream shop over here, and we can see where our 10-minute walk distances are going to be along these roads. But if I notice, there's actually a park over here. Bill Singer Park West. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right. But that line in the background there, perhaps that might be a trail. And if I'm sitting in that park, you can see that, well, I could probably reach that ice cream parlor within 10 minutes by walking down that trail, but it's not highlighted. And the reason for this is pretty simple. Remember, all the data that we got for this demo was extracted from the region of Waterloo's open data site. And while they had great road data, they also had great trail data. The challenge was the trails, at least in this instance, didn't connect to the roads. So a little bit of a jab there at the open data guys. I mean, you're doing a great job. But there is room for improvement there. If the trails connected to the roads, then we could have a complete and connected traversal path for people as they're walking through the city. And then I would have very easily been able to include the trails in this data set, and you would have seen a nice blue line hovering over this trail. That gives us a much more accurate representation of how we can get to our ice cream parlors. All right, so just you know, maybe a vision to move forward as we start including our trails as we start moving towards more multimodal options, because quite frankly, if you're walking, there are much more options than just taking surface roads. And we need to include that in our data to get better results. All right, so I'm going to geek out just a little bit here and show you the difference between the polygon data and the line data and how we got that. So bear with me, and for those of you who have seen this before, great. If you haven't seen it before, don't be alarmed or scared. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the Guru interface on how we actually got this thing done. And this is ArcMap, so it doesn't look as pretty as what we were looking at before, but what I wanted to show you is that, again, for those of you who have seen this before, when you do a solve for walk distances, you have an option, and this is the default option of selecting polygon generation. So if I check that box off, then you get what we saw earlier, and that would be this. You get these nice little shapes surrounding where you're going that give you a good indication of the coverage. But if I click on line generation and check that off, which is what I did, you get these lines. Different ways to look at it. In fact, I could probably have checked off both and gotten both, but of course I'm just highlighting different ways to look at this data right now, right? All right, so we've done that, we've gotten our lines, and here are our 10-minute walk times to ice cream parlors. Now, of course, we're talking transit here, right? Not just walking. So let me throw in a transit data. I'm going to tack on 20 minutes of transit. Now, I'm not adding 20 minutes to the 10 minutes. I'm basically extending my time frame, saying, okay, rather than walking for 10 minutes, I'm going to take transit, and if I take transit, I'm allowing myself 20 minutes because, you know, I'm a little bit more forgiving for my ice cream craving if I have 20 minutes to get there. So here's a map showing all the accessibility within 20 minutes. Now, what I've done is I've basically just expanded our analysis for 20 minutes, and this isn't entirely accurate, right? Because these blue areas include 20 minutes of transit, also 20 minutes of walking, and everything in between. And that is not entirely accurate. Remember, I'm talking about ice cream here. And if I'm willing to take a bus to get to my ice cream parlor, I probably only want to walk a maximum of, I don't know, 5 minutes, right? So 20 minutes total travel time, but of that 20 minutes, I only want to spend 5 of that walking, and the other 15, or at least up to 15, I'll allow myself to take transit. We can do that, right? We can do that by simply changing some things here. So I'll geek out for a moment again and take a look at some of the data that's generated by this, right? So if the data sheet that you see here is every single route that's possible from the city to a particular ice cream parlor. And the data that it generates is not only the cumulative travel time with transit. So this is what you're seeing here. This is like 17 minutes. There's 18 minutes. So the data set's quite large, about 15,000 records here. But if I move over here, you'll also see walk time. And this is part of the transit time. So if you look at the first one here, that's 17 minutes total, but 15 minutes of that 17 is walking. See, this is not acceptable to me. I'm more interested in things where I actually can walk less than 5 minutes. So using the data that I have in front of me, I can filter this data set. And once it's filtered, I get a much more accurate result, and that is this guy right here. So now, you see all that extra stuff disappear because I've taken away the possibility to walk to the ice cream parlor within 20 minutes. I've basically said 20 minutes transit time and maximum 5 walking. And here is the results of that. So a little bit more precise view of those who want to fulfill their ice cream cravings. Now here's another factor to this as well. I've done this analysis at 10 a.m. So this is based on arriving at that ice cream parlor at 10 a.m. Now, I'm surely not like most people, and I will happily eat an ice cream at 10 a.m. Like, I'll have it with my breakfast. Chocolate ice cream is fantastic for breakfast, especially with brownies. Oh, so good. But, you know, I figure most people would probably want an ice cream craving, you know, maybe after dinner in the evening or something like that. So I've also done an analysis at 9 p.m., and this is what it looks like. So you see a little bit of a difference there between 10 and 9. I've actually rigged up a little bit of a slider chart here, which I'll show you. So this is the same data, but I'm just using this little slider graph to show you the difference between the 9 p.m. accessibility to ice cream parlors and the 10 a.m. accessibility to ice cream parlors, right? This is a templated app that you can build off ArcGIS Online, real easy to do, but it allows us to compare 2 different things. Now this makes sense, right? Because the schedule at 10 a.m. is different from the schedule at 9 p.m. And so that's why we have different areas of coverage that are accessible to ice cream parlors at 9 than we do at 10, and vice versa. So, you know, using this type of tool, we can get very, very precise as to when we perform our analysis. And if you allow me to geek out again, I'll show you where that kind of setting is done. Under the settings, we can actually go to the analysis settings here, and we can find that we're using a time of day. In this analysis, I use 10 a.m. right there. We can use a specific date. This is all possible because the GTFS data includes that information, right? We have calendar dates in the GTFS data. We have stop times in the GTFS data. All of that data that is already generated by our transit agencies gives us the ability to do this awesome time-based analysis for where we want to go. So I hope this also identifies that, depending on the time that you run this analysis, we get very different results. And you can generate any number of these maps to give you a better idea of your transit accessibility at any particular time. But just to highlight how much of a difference it actually makes. Remember, what I'm looking at right now is 10 a.m. versus 9 p.m. The map changes every minute of the day because if you, as you might imagine, if you just missed the bus, then you might have to wait for the next bus, and that next bus might not show up for, I don't know, 20 minutes, 15 minutes. It all depends on the schedule. So it makes a huge impact. And take a look at this. What I've done is I've generated this map 10 times, and each map was generated for 1-minute intervals from 10 a.m. to 10:10 a.m. And this is what it looks like. So if I just do this this is another app, by the way, that is freely available using ArcGIS Online. Real easy to generate this stuff. If I just push play here, it's going to show you a time lapse of how the accessibility to ice cream parlors changes with every minute. So this, again, is 10 a.m. to 10:10 a.m. Look at the variation of the accessibility that we get here. I've only done 10 minutes here. You can stretch this out to go throughout the entire day. And then by taking this data, the resulting data that you can get a very, very accurate picture about what kind of accessibility people have to their ice cream shops in their areas. And of course, I'm talking ice cream, but it could be anything. It could be libraries. It could be other places of interest, sports. It could be schools. It could be anything, right? But having this ability to do that is so incredibly powerful. And it also gives us an idea about their scheduling. By doing an analysis like this, you'll be able to see where the real big gaps are. And if there is demand for transit, or maybe if we want to increase demand for transit at that particular area, we can zero in on where we need to adjust and improve our schedules in order to meet that demand, or perhaps even create some additional demand. Very interesting stuff. And I'll say it again. Everything that you've seen so far is using the freely downloadable tools that are curated by Esri in order to generate this type of thing, basically interpret the GTFS and generate these maps, with addition to freely accessible open data and the network analysis extension. We're going to expand this a step further now and start looking at other data that might be accessible to you using other avenues. And we're going to let Christina take it away from here.
Sounds good. Perfect. So that was very exciting. Eric just talked about both Eric and I talked about how you can get to a place just looking at distance. For example, the supermarket scenario where we were solely looking at distance and how to get to a supermarket using both mode of transportation by walking and taking the bus. And also Eric talked about how to bring in the time factor into your transit planning as well. So we were looking at both time and distance and how to get ice cream, taking both factors into consideration. So I guess I really have to time myself evaluating the accessibility of the time between 10 and 10:10 a.m., right? It's that specific. So now we're going to look at another application, which is called Insights for ArcGIS, and you're looking at it right now. And the data on my first page here, so these are my pages, I have 3 pages in total, and this is my workbook, by the way, for those of you who haven't seen Insights before. What we're going to do here is to bring some demographic data and perform some deeper analysis based on the data that we are bringing in. So whatever I showed you earlier, that those data were available in the open data site. And we would like to do further analysis by bringing in additional data. But first, I have to start with what we already have. And if you're wondering where this data comes from, as you saw earlier, Eric had shared that data to the organization. So I have access to that as well. It's just in the content of our organization. And I've added that data to my workbook. Where this data is the data that he showed earlier, the stops that were generated by the GTFS tools, and also the bus routes. And I'm showing it by the route ID that you can see it right here. Another data set that I brought in is the same data set that he showed as well as the trips per hour data. So the dark areas are areas where there are more trips per hour. And if we click on one, you see there's 52 trips per hour in that location. So that's a very central location. And you see the value, the X15, that's our mean, I think. So 15 trips per hour on average for all these areas. Okay. So now we understand what data I brought in. I'm going to go ahead, do some data exploration with our current data. So here you're looking at, if you don't look at the colors for now, this map and this map here are exact same in shapes, but they're different in polygons. So why is that? The map on the left, the trips per hour map, is the original data that I brought in that Arif has shared with me. And the right-hand side are the DAs, so dissemination areas. And this data comes from Stats Canada. It's all open data as well. What I did, I basically clipped the dissemination area using my trips per hour. This is because I want to do some demographic analysis, and I would like to do it based on a dissemination area level. And you, of course, have the choice to do it on census tracts or any other areas that you would like to download from Stats Canada. I'm doing dissemination areas because I want to look at more detailed data and to do some other analysis. And okay, so let's now just focus on the map on the right-hand side. I'm showing a 2016 total population right here. It shows on the top right corner. And how did I get that data? Because in the original trips per hour, I only have the trips per hour data. So how did I do that? This is an action button right here on the lower right of the map. And from here, for those of you who are not familiar with spatial tools, you have this Find Answers tab. So this will give you some idea if you kind of know you want to figure out something, but you don't know what exactly the tool you're looking for. So let's see how it's distributed. And then it leads you to the tools that you might need. But for this case, I know what I was looking for. I was looking at the Enrich Data button right here. So what does this do? So the data browser has data from, I think, more than 130 or 140 countries around the world. And this data is powered by Enronix Analytics for the Canadian data. And for the Canada data set, we have a lot of categories. So all these categories are available to you within this environment. It's also available in ArcGIS Online as well. It's just, if you have ever used that, it's the same with ArcGIS Online. So from here, I have some population data. And this is where I got the population totals. So if I want, let's say, if I want to add this data to my dissemination areas that does not have any data, I'll just select that one. And some other interesting data that we might look at is income, maybe household, median household income. So once you select a category, it gives you more variables that you can select additionally. So here are all the variables from 2016. We see there are different categories, but also I'm more interested in the median household income for the current year. Another category I would like to point out is in the spending category. So in the spending, we have a lot of different subcategories, and what we are interested for this specific case is transportation. And you can see we have a lot of information just regarding on the spending of transportation. It's very detailed. I'm interested at the private transportation and as well as the, let's see, what else is interesting for us. Of course, the public transportation, and see how specific it is. It says 2016 bus, subway, streetcar, commuter train. So select that one, and that's because there is another category. Just bear with me for 1 second. Oh, so yes, there's another category that's called 2016 public transportation. And the difference between that and the bus, subway, streetcar is the public transportation also include airfares. So it includes all, and also taxi, train, highway buses, so all the public transportation method, even outside of the city. So that's something different, and that's something you can take into consideration when you are looking for your data.
Christina, sorry for jumping in here, but I noticed that some of this data, you're looking at 2016. I couldn't help but notice that there was even future dates in there as well. There was some that showed 2021. Could you highlight that for a moment? I think that might be interesting in perhaps looking at some of this trends data and even predicting into the future?
That's right. So what this data also includes is projection data as well. So you can see it's in a 3-year, kind of divided into 3 years, 2019, 2021. And this is also provided by Environics Analytics. This will allow us to do some analysis for, future planning if we want to look at something in kind of like short-term kind of thing. So that's really cool.
You also mentioned, Christina, that I know you're doing this browser within the Insights data exploration tool, but you said it's also available using ArcGIS Online. So in other words, for Esri customers, this data is available for just about everybody. Now, it's not free, like I was talking about earlier, but it is available, correct?
Yes, that's right. So, yep. If you have ArcGIS Online, you have access to this data already. So just by bringing in your data to ArcGIS Online, and you can enrich it based on all these data categories that you will like. You don't have to use Insights, but Insights do, the pages in the workbook do provide a very different way to visualize data, which I will show you in just a second. And another functionality I just want to point it out for the data browser before I move on is you can also search for the variables that you might be looking for. So I just searched transit, and I have this one, the household population 15 years old or over for method of travel to work. So that's very interesting. And we're definitely interested at travel to work by public transit or by private. So I'm going to search travel to work instead. And that gives us more category on, the method of travel to work. And I'm interested at car as a driver and also the public transit. There we go. So the data is very specific. You do have to look through what you're looking for, which means it's very good. It's very detailed. It provides you a lot of information on what specific categories you're looking at. Once that's done, I have 8 variables selected. Going to apply, and then you just have to run it. And to save some time, I already run all the data enrichment here. So from the original DA dissemination areas that I didn't really have anything other than the DA UID, I've added the data enrichment allow me to add all these categories, all these data into my original data set. Okay, so now we have the data. The next thing I'm interested at is a ratio between how many people are traveling to work and versus how many people are traveling using a car. And since we have that data, we're just going to work directly from the data right now. And as I mentioned, you have this Find Answers tab to find something that to find a tool that you may not exactly know which one you're looking for, but you know the kind of questions that you would want to ask. So in my case, to look at the relationship between 2 variables, I'm going to look at how is this related. And I'm going to calculate a ratio. And that is my layer. So from that, choose a layer. I have multiple layers, but that's the one I want. That's right. And I can do travel to work, public transit. That's the numerator. And get a denominator, the travel to work, driving. And then you just gave the name of result field, and that data will pop up. So let's just take a look at the data table and how it looks like after it's calculated, because I've done that because I want to show the chart at the bottom. but I'll show you what it looks like once it's done. So we do that calculation, and it will create a new field in your data right here, and it will show the ratio between the public versus private. And if you're worried about the data is being changed or modified, this process does not change the underlying data, but you do have the option to share the data if you would like to your organization after you've done the calculation. Okay, so let's now look at some charts. So the reason why I said ArcGIS Online and Insights both have great functionalities, but this depends on what you do. When you are doing analysis, Insights definitely provide a better user interface because, as you can see, I'm putting two maps right beside each other and comparing them together. And also, I have these charts that goes along with my map. And what it does, more exciting, is it links everything together. So as I click on one thing, it highlights what's on my map and also on my other charts as well. So let me do this again. If I click on that, there we go. It highlights my polygon. It might be a little hard to see, but it's this one right here. And you can also see that it highlights the other one on my other chart. That's enough talk of the chart, but let's take a look at what this chart is telling us. So what I'm doing is the medical, the median household income versus the public transit and how they're traveling to public transit. And the chart beside it is the median household income compared to how many people are driving to work. This chart is quite interesting, right, Arif?
Totally agree. I mean, you notice that the one on the left, the people taking public transit, you do have a lot of dots up top, the bigger dots up top, which might be what you'd expect because that's the amount of people who are actually taking public transit in a particular income bracket. But the really interesting story here is that both charts actually look a little similar, right? There is certain areas that we would expect. I mean, if you look at the average household income for Canada, I think it's somewhere around the realm of 76,000 or something like that. So we'd expect that perhaps a little bit under that bracket, the 50,000 or 60,000 mark, is where we're going to get more people using public transit, and perhaps a little over that bracket, around the 100,000 mark, is where we get a lot of personal vehicles. But that actually, the mass of dots is low down and it's spread out. And so that's giving me a hint that although income does bear a difference, families with larger incomes can afford 2 cars and so they don't need to take transit, there's still quite a number of people who are making more than enough income and still taking transit, and even those who are making very little income and actually using their car. So it's actually quite encouraging.
Yes, it's definitely very interesting. So what Insights allows us to do is these kind of things. You can explore a lot of new things that was not originally in your data. Okay, so if you're wondering why this chart has bigger dots or a different size of dots and this one doesn't, it's because I have an additional field on this one is the total population. So how did I do that? I simply just drag and drop the total population on top of my existing card to symbolize my data using 3 different attributes, basically. So you have X and Y, but the size of the symbol shows how many people are in that category, how many people are using public transportation in that group. And once I drop that on, it finished drawing the chart. It shows us how many people are using private transportation in that category. So we have more people there, travel to work driving, and things like that.
I just want to reiterate that although we have these charts, Christina did do it already, but if you click on any one of those dots, you actually see the location associated of those dots on the maps above. So not only do we have a great distribution of where our people are, whether they're taking personal or public transportation, we also know where they're coming from and where they actually live. And this, of course, is very important and useful information for planners.
For sure. Great. Okay, let's move on to the next little bit. what I want to look at, so here the map is showing the median household income using the color scheme. So the darker the area is, the more median household income. I've also applied a filter to the trips per hour data. So what it's showing is areas where the dots show up are areas that have more than 20 trips per hour in that area. And that's a pretty good value so divided by 60 divided like 3 minutes, right? Every 3 minutes, yeah. So that's a good indicator. But what I'm interested at are these people. So these people are considered to be the higher income category, but they're also taking public transit. I'm just interested at where they are. And as I mentioned, Insights is very interactive. You can select, so I did it too quick probably, but you have these tools on top here. I just showed you how to do a filter, but I'm going to use the selection tools. I'm going to draw a polygon around this area. And this highlights the area on my map. It also highlights the related categories, the related dots on the other chart, but what it does, it highlights all these areas on my map. So now I know where are those people, these people do make higher income, but they're also using public transportation, and I want to see in comparison where are they in terms of the very accessible areas. But when we're looking at this, it seems interesting because they're not exactly overly with the very accessible areas. And Eric, do you have some input for that? Why is this happening?
Well, there's a number of reasons, and I think we'll leave it to the experts to determine as to why that happens. But I think the real interesting thing here is to be able to highlight this. And using these kind of tools, we're able to identify that, oh, wait a minute, we actually have people who are not in accessible areas or transit accessible areas, but they still want to use transit. So, perhaps there's 2 cars in the family, one goes to work and drops the other one at the bus stop. There's any number of different reasons. But I think this also helps us identify places where should we increase our accessibility in those areas? This also begs the whole chicken and egg question, right? Did those areas that are already accessible get that way because of people's demand, or was it opposite? Do we increase the accessibility artificially in order to get more people to use transit there? Lots of options available, and of course, Christina and I are here not to give answers, but just to show you that by using some of these data tools, we have some great insight that helps us understand the questions that we need to ask to get better results out of our transit system. I think you did have one more chart to show, right, Christina?
That's right. That's right. Just one last one. So on my next page, which is my last page, I have this travel to work. So what I'm comparing is the daytime population. Oh, by the way, the daytime population was also grabbed by enriching the data, so the data browser, and we have that data available as well. So daytime population at work, comparing to how they travel to work, so their mode of travel to work. So on the left-hand side, I have travel to work by public transit and also travel to work by car. So this is very interesting because the chart, again, also looks very similar in nature, right? That's very interesting. But if you look at the number down here, it tells you this is 500 and this is 50. So we still don't have a lot of numbers taking public transit. But that's okay. What I'm interested at stands out is this one right here. So let's take a look at where that area is. It is this area right here. So apparently a lot of people are traveling to work using both cars and public transportation in that area. And we're going to zoom in a little bit just to go ahead on that part and see how it compares with our trips per hour and within that area. So as we can see, we have some areas that are very accessible using public transit. This one has 25 trips per hour, and this one has 15 trips per hour. And the other areas around there is maybe that's C5 and 5. So yeah, this area is kind of a mixed, right? Mixed area. People can get there using public transit or using private transportation. And that makes me wonder, why do some people don't travel there using public transit when it's so accessible by public transit?
Well, I think this region is interesting in itself, right? I mean, the Waterloo region has quite a good proximity to the GTA, the Toronto region. And so a number of people who work in this region live in the GTA. And so, you know, really at this point, it's not a lot of good access. So a lot of drivers are actually coming in. And if you notice, that location is right beside the 401 highway. So you do get a lot of people coming into what appears to be an industrial area from various parts of the city. But you also have good transit because, well, it is accessible by transit. And the people who actually work in that area but live in the region can take transit this location. So, I mean, putting all this data together, it is strikingly interesting when you start to sum it all up. And one of the things that Christina and I observed when we start looking at this data is, contrary to some of the popular assumptions that might exist, you know, perhaps south of the border within the United States, is that public transit, or at least taking the bus, is usually for the lower income bracket. And looking at this data, you know, suggested exactly the opposite. We had people who were all over the map in terms of income scales, who are also taking transit and and private transportation.
That's right. Actually, speaking of that, I have another chart to show just a very interesting chart that I would like to show. This is actually the new charting option in Insights, and it's a box chart. I created it. It's showing the average public transportation spending in terms of each dissemination area. And what you're looking at is basically a standard deviation chart. The top here, where it's dotted lines, are the ones, are what we call the outliers. They're spending more than average on public transportation. And I've selected this area by just clicking on the dot, and let's see where are those areas on my map. And we can see, although it doesn't completely overlay with our very accessible areas, but it does have a very good coverage so the trips per hour, the very accessible areas kind of overlaps, kind of overlaps with the areas where people are spending a lot of public transit. So that's telling us something, right?
It certainly is. I'm gonna step into a little bit of a monologue here. I think it might be a good opportunity. You know, especially with transit. I mean, no matter what we do as transit professionals in order to adjust our schedules or adjust our routes, most of the people on this call probably realize that there really is no right answer, because you're going to get a whole host of people who live in a city who are going to complain, you know, about a bus stop that's been removed in order to improve efficiencies or this and that. And you'll get people who agree with your moves and people who disagree with your moves. I don't think that there's anything that we can do to get away from that. But I'm hoping that one of the things that you've seen through examining all this data that Christina and I have been able to show is that we get much better insight into some of this data to help us make better decisions. Because ultimately, yes, as transit agencies, we want to improve ridership, right? If we improve ridership, we're going to increase profits and reduce the dependency on the system in order to continue to fund our transit systems. But ridership is one aspect of this. In fact, it might be an outcome. Really, if you look at this from a rider's perspective, it's not necessarily about is that bus going to be passing through my neighborhood. It's, in my opinion anyways, it's about freedom of mobility. Right? If I have a personal vehicle and if I want to go somewhere, I hop in that vehicle and I go. The real reason that I would choose transit over vehicle is if I had the same, or if not better, options in taking transit. And these days, with the increase in traffic congestion and challenges of getting places and cost of parking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, transit is becoming much more appealing as an option. But at the same time, if I had, and I heard somebody else, and I'm going to quote them, unfortunately I forgot who it was that said this, but if at the end of my driveway I had this gate that opened every 15 minutes, and it only opened for 30 seconds, I had a 30-second window to reach that gate, or at least drive out of my driveway with my car, that would be infuriating to me, right? Because I have this car, I have the ability to get places, but if the gate only opened once every 15 minutes for 30 seconds, that severely limits my mobility. Well, that's almost the same as looking at a bus that arrives at a bus stop. if that frequency is poor and I can't get to that bus or it's limiting my options, then my freedom of mobility is now affected. And so, you know, we don't have unlimited funds in order to address all the empty spots in our systems. And so we have to be very strategic as to where we spend our money to improve our transit systems. And I'm hoping that some of this data opens up the eyes of our planners to be able to start investigating a little bit further as to how we can start to apply some of these changes. Now, we only have about 5 minutes left before the end, and I want to get to some of these questions that showed up. So perhaps I can go through them quickly. If we don't hit all the questions, we can always continue this conversation after the fact, right? But let's see. If I go through some of these questions, I think the first one was not really a question. It was actually a comment about the asparagus farm. Oh, that was probably the supermarket that you had pointed out, Christina, that it was a asparagus farm country market.
That's cool. Thank you.
Interesting. Okay. Is there an easy way to merge roads and pathways? Oh, this brings it back to the topic that I had about the trails. Is there an easy way to merge roads and pathways? I don't know that there's an easy way to take two different data sets, one of trails and one of roads, and have them connect magically. There might not be a magic button to do that. But I think those who are skilled in the use of ArcGIS might be able to do that. And Christina has some thoughts on this.
Yes, I think there are definitely ways to do it. You can use ArcGIS Desktop or just Pro to do that process. And I don't really know what you mean by easy. In my understanding, you can have different subtypes in your road network. So let's say you have one subtype for the trails and one subtype for the roads, and then you can merge them together, and you can build a new network data set based on that new data, and it will have both roads and trails. So you will assign different classes or subtypes, the geodatabase side of things, to your data. So that's not very hard to do.
So the individual who posed that question, I encourage them to contact us, and we can work with you to help you figure out how we can come to a solution to get those shapefiles or feature layers merged. Next question is about calendar dates. Can we switch the screen back to mine? Just bear with me for a second here. And I'll open up the calendar dates text file so we can see it. There we go. Okay, we got my screen. So let me just pop open that file. Again, this came directly from the region of Waterloo, so we did no changes to this at all. But I'm not sure if whoever asked is looking for this, but that is what it looks like. And if you're interested in getting this, again, it's open data, which is available from the website. So just go to the website and grab the GTFS file. And this is what the calendar dates looks like. Right. Not really readable to you or I, but again, that is the purpose of those tools that I showed you earlier, to interpret that information. Okay, let me go back and we'll see if I can get some more questions out here. And I lost my questions.
I'm looking at one available on Portal for ArcGIS. I'm afraid you might have to elaborate a little bit on that question. I also had another question about, you may have already mentioned this, but how is Insights available? Will it be available with ArcGIS Online soon? Yes. The answer is yes. But I don't have a firm date for you of when Insights will be completely available in ArcGIS Online. We were targeting at the end of the year, so look forward to that. It will be available eventually. Now it's just available on Portal and requires a 10.5 enterprise structure for that.
And thank you to Jeff, who had correctly identified that it was Jarrett Walker who had the driveway gate analogy. If you haven't, we're all in the transit space, so we've probably heard of Jarrett Walker, but he is a very accomplished speaker and very opinionated on transit issues. And so, yes, he had the original analogy about the driveway gate analogy. There was also another question here about can the time lapse of transit accessibility be generated in ArcScene as well? I'm not sure I know the answer to that. What I can tell you is that the time lapse of transit accessibility is a series of analyses that were performed using ArcMap 1 minute apart. And then the resulting data was merged into a map, and it basically has a time field associated with it. So each and every result had a time, and those times were, of course, offset by 1 minute each. Once you have a field which is a time and date field, there is a template within ArcGIS Online that interprets that automatically. So it catches the fact that we have a time field and that each and every time is split by one minute, and you're able to pretty much instantly generate this. So the question was, can this be generated in Arc Scene? I don't know the answer. Maybe Christina might have some insight into that.
So Arc Scene is, to my understanding, I have not used it personally. We have too many products. Arc Scene is a 3D viewer, right, if I understand it correctly, and it will allow you to navigate and interact with your 3D features and raster data. So it's more on the 3D side of things, so you're working with 3D symbology and texture mapping. So I don't know if you have the if ArcScene has the capability to create an online, the time-lapse thing. So you might have to do some further investigation in that, but it's very easy to use this ArcGIS Online, and you can get a trial if you don't already have an existing account.
All right. Thank you, Regina. So we've reached the end of our time. It's now 2 o'clock. So those questions who are still outstanding will reach out after the fact. And I encourage questions to keep coming in. Let's keep this conversation going. We should have our email addresses available to everybody with a follow-up email. And thank you all for joining today. We really appreciate your time. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Thank you once again, and have yourselves a great day.
Thank you, guys.